Alright, hello everybody. This week I'm going to go over chapter 4, Does Punishment Work? So basically this chapter is talking about we use punishment so much, but basically does it actually work for what we intend it to do? Or are there other effects that make it less effective? So punishment is for controlling others. If not, many established punishment practices would be revenge-based, but we don't want revenge when punishing a child. And there's lots of other examples where revenge just wouldn't make very much sense, so it really is about controlling others. So punishment is done to stop or prevent actions. You can punish by removing positive reinforcers, or punish by applying what he calls negative reinforcers, which bothered me in the chapter, which I'm sure you guys were bothered by it too. Punishment can often create vicious cycles of people trying to punish each other. So like one person tries to punish them because they're mad or unhappy with how they were treated, then they punish the other person for their behavior, their punishment behavior. So oftentimes punishment backfires in that way. So why as society do we so readily agree to the convention of punishment as for controlling behavior? So why do we use punishment then? We also don't really like punishment. Many people don't like to give it out, and lots of people, and definitely no one really likes to get punishment. So why do we rely on it so much? So a lot of this is justice. The term justice, or the idea of justice, is tied up in a lot of punishment practices. So justice kind of explains that they deserve it. If you don't punish them, they won't learn, sort of thing. Or if you do something bad, then you deserve to be punished. So that's the idea of justice for the most part. So does it work? Does it accomplish its purpose? Is it effective? People who argue should versus should not both use religion, morality, and common decency or common sense to argue their points about whether to do punishment or not, which, if they're using the same reasonings, then that's a problem, right? And then also, you can look at capital punishment as very effective, but it's largely very effective because you end up killing the offender, the behavior. So that stops behavior pretty well. The chapter asks, are prisons effective? So like with recidivism, when we send someone to jail, are they going to be less likely to commit those crimes in the future, or even while in prison? Are they actually going to turn their behavior around, or are they going to keep doing the same unwanted behavior? Also within all this, social statistics can be really unreliable because you can kind of read into them however you want to. You can pull out this statistic here, this statistic there, and to argue your point, but you might be not telling the whole picture. Okay, so how do we study punishment? In order to figure out if it's effective and whether it should keep being used, it would help to study it. So, most of this chapter talked about what a experiment would look like with a rat, and then it talks about a few different tangents along the way. So, first off, you need someone with stable and predictable baseline. So their behavior needs to be stable and predictable for baseline. So that problem behavior that you want to punish and make less needs to be stable and predictable. Otherwise, if there is change, you can't really tell whether it's just variability or the effect of punishment. Um, so with a rat, they often have to teach them through positive reinforcement, um, lever for actually that's not true, through classical conditioning, the lever for food pellets, um, and so they've learned to get food pellets by pressing the lever, and then the electric shock or punisher. So they, for the punishment experiment, they add in electric shock as the punishment. Um, so along with the lever push, it also shocks them, but will also give them food. Um, other popular punishers are bright lights, loud sounds, air puffs, loss of support. Um, Automatic devices help prevent latency confounds. So, in terms of delivering the food pellets or the electric shock, a lot of times they use the automatic devices so that there isn't too long of a or there's the right amount of latency between when the stimulus happens and when the punishment happens. Also, intensity, duration, and frequency of punishments must be considered. So, like a milder punishment would be different than a stronger one, or a punishment that lasts for longer duration when it's given would potentially be more effective than one with short duration. Those sorts of things. Okay, so what really happens with punishment? Um, so the rat is hitting the lever, and that decreases when food drops along with the shock. Excuse me. Um, the rat will start up again and press even though shocked. So it'll stop for a while after the shock, but then, it needs food ultimately at some point. So eventually it'll go back and still get shocked, um, because that's the only way to get food. So this part of the experiment kind of goes into the idea of recidivism. So, like, the rat only has one way to get food, so they have to do that behavior that's being punished in order to get food. Similarly, a criminal, oftentimes in prison, they're not really taught a lot of replacement skills or behaviors to replace the ones that they're in prison for. So in other words, they have no other lever to press to survive in the world. So when they go back out into the world, oftentimes you see that they continue to commit crimes and wind up back in prison. So eventually, though, magnitude of shocks will cease recovery altogether. So at a certain point of um, magnitude of the shock, then then the rat won't recover anymore, or anyone really. So when you get punishers to the strongest level, that's when they can be most effective at ceasing the behavior you want to cease by the end of it, or decrease by the end of it. So then they give a experiment example of rat changing jobs. So they also give a different task to get food now, because part of the problem is, well, okay, so what happens? What if you do give him another job or another skill to be able to obtain food and survive? So they put a chain at the top of the cage that if he pulls it, then he will get food. So then, he learns to, instead of go to the place where he gets shocked, then he'll go get what gets food. So the part of that's important is in order to really truly stop unwanted behavior, the best option is to pair mild punishment to decrease the behavior you don't want, but then positively reinforce the new job or the new behavior, the replacement behaviors for that problem behavior that was being punished. So you really have to teach those alternate responses, those alternative behaviors. The rest of the chapter kind of talks about how also we can't really judge that everybody reacts to punishment the same. Some people, it turns into a reinforcer. So like with self with self-injurious behavior, oftentimes, that pain would oftentimes be something that's not wanted, but the attention that comes along with it, or some other part of it, is also providing them reinforcement or in some way. Also, they give a good example, or he gives a good example in this chapter about how oftentimes parents will accidentally teach their child that punishment is something that leads to what they want, so like attention from the parent. So oftentimes, a parent will deliver the punishment, they'll feel guilty, and then they'll smother the child after. So then the child learns that, yeah, maybe I get a punishment that I don't like very well, but at the end of it all, I get a lot of love and attention from my parents. So those are some examples of how punishment can kind of backfire. The chapter gives a few other examples and talks about whether some of this is masochism, but really it's a lot of like what we were talking about, is punishment can transform its contingency. So originally it might be punishing, but after a while it can be either desensitized or some other way where the punishment becomes weaker. Okay, so that concludes my summary of chapter 4. So what do you think? What are the aspects of punishment that work well? What do you think? And then what do you think are the worst side effects or ways that punishment backfires in society? So I want you guys to talk about that this week.